Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Intelligent Business Process Management, where technology meets process, people, and innovation. So we're going to have a special session at this segment now, where where I will be presenting to you some best practices from more than 30,000 excellence and innovation leaders across more than 100 organizations. So I'm going to be changing hats as I do this presentation, and as I change my first hat here, I'm going to move to my presentation background. If you hang with me for just a minute here, where we are talking about shifting culture. So as we shift culture with the implementation of intelligent business process management. So the title is Where Leadership Meets Process, Technology, and People. So I'm going to start this session with a question to you, and I want you to use the questions box. Use the questions box on the webinar to tell me, what do you think matters most on your IBPM journey? And is it most important to have the ideas? Is it about the methods? Is it about technologies? Or it's about people? Now, we're going to be talking about all of these components, and you can't be on the fence and say, well, it's all of them. Yeah. Every one of them plays a role. But if you have to pick the most important, which one would you choose? And I'm going to go back to this question at the end of the session. But right now, go ahead and pick an option. Is it ideas? Is it methods? Is it technologies? Is it people? And use the questions box to enter your answer. All right, I'm going to be monitoring that throughout, and then we'll catch up at the end. Everybody has to commit to one of these options. You cannot be on the fence. You have to commit to one of them. Very well. So I'm going to start with this quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald, because what you're going to see is that the topics that I'm going to talk about for great implementation of IBPM, they are going to be quite challenging. They're going to be, sometimes they're going to sound like they're contradictory, because I'm going to start talking about the importance of certain things related to discipline and other things related to purpose and aspiration. I'm going to talk about concepts that are very seem antagonistic on the surface, but in reality, it's by mastering that complexity and those forces pulling in different directions that you achieve greatness. And the experience that I'm going to highlight for you are not based on my personal view on these issues. These are based because I am not a visionary leader who has the ability to predict the future. The way that I operate is that I work with some incredibly bright, accomplished people across many organizations. And what they do is that they don't predict the future. They experiment a lot. They basically see what works and what doesn't work. And when they find something that works, they try to understand why it works. And once they understand why it works, they scale that. So they're not real visionaries as much as they think ahead and they look ahead. It's more about their ability to experiment quickly and scale fast. And in dealing with that, they deal with a lot of contradictions. And one of the greatest contradictions is this contradiction between excellence and innovation. Because a lot of IBPM is about excellence, is about setting performance standards and meeting, exceeding those performance standards. But that's not enough. You must also innovate. And can IBPM be used as a platform for innovation? Because if you're in the business of just excellence, you're squeezing efficiencies out of horses. But we all know that we can't dominate an industry and we can't design cars by squeezing efficiencies out of horses. So how do we use this tension that exists between excellence and innovation to really scale IBPM in our organizations? Now, although there are over 100 organizations that I can talk about in terms of the insights and practical lessons that we have learned, I'm going to focus on my own experiences here as a leader of excellence and innovation for these 5 organizations. I started my career at Sony as a design engineer, and then I migrated into a startup, and later on as an innovation leader for Nestle. And lastly, spent the last nearly 15 years in the infrastructure, energy, oil and gas, and very complex industries. So and those are tough environments for IBPM. And I want to bring some of those lessons to our talk today. And starting with on the definition of what IBPM is. So as you think about intelligent BPM, a lot of us will run and start thinking about technology. And we'll discuss that a little bit more. But I would like you to consider this definition of intelligent BPM. Technology is part of it, but it's not the driver. Intelligent BPM is the intelligent blend of stewardship with the wisdom of the organization and proven methods to identify, prioritize, and implement significant value creation, business process designs, improvements, and innovations. So the process owners, they play a critical role. We heard that on Jabel's presentation early on today, and in earlier presentations on day one. Process owners must intelligently design value creation processes to meet organizational and customer needs. Very well. So part of our talk today is going to be about fundamental things and some visionary things, if you will. So let's go back on fundamentals of IBPM. First of all, there is a level of maturity associated with the processes that you have in your organization. Now, you can have different hierarchy and different names for these steps, but I'm posing one model here that starts at a level where you have a process that's recognized and success depends on individual effort and knowledge, to another level where now it's identified and there's some limited process documentation in place. And then there's a level that's defined and you fully document the process and the intent of the process is understood. And then it moves on to be managed when it's now integrated with metrics, and then to the highest level, which is optimized, where you have everything that in the previous steps, but also you're continuously improving and innovating on the way that that process is done. Now, there's a question to be posed here, and which is, what level should your organizational processes be at? And then we talk with people who are sometimes very quality minded. They jump into this one and say, oh, they should be optimized. And that is not the right answer. Your processes, even the key business processes that you have, may or may not need to be at the optimized level. There is a cost benefit of getting this maturity, and you have to evaluate that. So we could talk about this for a whole week. We don't have that time. Let's just summarize by saying that if a process is worth having, and that's the first discussion you need to have in your organization, which processes are worth having? Some of them are not worth having. But if a process is worth having because it creates value for the clients and the organization, it should be at the defined level at least. Whether or not you mature further depends largely on the benefits of maturing the process further. So keep that one lesson in mind. The other portion that I want to talk about is related to levels of innovation associated with IBPM. Now, innovation is not one size fits all, and IBPM provides a great platform and structure for you to innovate upon, because the essence of innovation is the ability to take a different perspective at problems, and IBPM allows us to create a reference frame for us to take different perspectives again. Now, on the way that you innovate, there is not just one way. The numbers that you see here, they represent about 3,000 cross-industry organizations who are considered to be innovative, and you open the curtain, you go behind the scenes and what the media is portraying about those organizations, and you learn what's really going on with innovation in those organizations. And what you find is that this golden ratio of innovation emerges, which is about 70% of the innovations that they do, they're at the core of their business. They're in the performance engine of their business. It's day-to-day stuff. It's fixing problems, improving. Some of it's incremental, but some of it is at the core and also can be breakthrough. It's about 70% of the overall effort. There's about 20%, there are adjacencies to that core. These are extensions of the core. These ideas that grow the business somehow. They can be extensions of technology, they can be extensions of client segments, they can be extensions of geography, they can be adjacent strategies. But they typically represent about 20% of the total. And then you have the 10% disruptive or transformational. And of course, this will vary from industry to industry across 3,000 organizations. That's roughly what you get. Depending on your industry, could be higher or lower. But that disruptive piece gets about 100% of the media attention. And we started judging our innovation efforts based on that, and certainly judging the evolution of our IBPM when it comes to innovation based on that. And that's the wrong measuring stick to use, because disruptive innovation is often confused with technology, but it's not. Disruptive innovation at its core is about disrupting a business model. Technology is just an enabler for doing that. If you think about the great innovations or the disruptive innovations that we're currently dealing with, there's a lot of focus on technology, but the reality is that they are disruptive not because of technology, it's because of the disruption of the business model, and technology was an enabler for that disruption to take place. So I want you to keep that in mind, because that's true at all levels of innovation, where technology is useful when it is an enabler for you to accelerate improvements and innovations and value creation for your organization. So I will talk a little bit more about technology in the context of IBPM, but I wanted to you to have the concept early on. Now let's go deeper. Let's go into the pillars of success for IBPM value creation. So it's not about having it, it's about deriving the most value from it. And when you look at the organizations that not only have IBPM in place, but they are deriving great value, the clients and customers are deriving great value from it, and the organization itself is benefiting from it, what does it look like? Is it about ideas? Is it about methods? Is it about people? Is it about technology? So that's the question that we are going to answer in the end. And surprisingly, what you're going to find out, and I'm going to share with you, it's none of those things. It's combinations and aspect of those things. But these are the three main pillars of success for IBPM for value creation. So the first level is governance, is having defined roles and a structure for IBPM that creates value. So some of these roles were discussed before, and I'm going to go in a little bit deeper with them in this session. Then there are certain methods that apply, and these methods are not just proven methodologies that have been around for some time and they work really well, but it's also about having clear execution mechanisms, and in which those methodologies create value. It's not about the methodology, it's about the use of the methodology to create disproportional value through these clear execution mechanisms, and having a common language where the organization can dialogue on how IBPM functions and how it becomes an engine for improvement and innovation. And lastly, and probably most important, is certainly most important to the most mature levels of IBPM, is the development of collaborative leadership skills in the organization. And these are skills that are not very well taught in academia, and these are skills that you kind of learn haphazardly in the workplace often, but there is an entire approach, there's an entire body of knowledge, and there's an entire practice behind collaborative leadership skills, focus on innovation and value creation. And having that is a key differentiator for the organizations at the highest levels of maturity. So let me show you what those organizations typically go through when it comes to governance, maturity levels, and collaborative leadership. So first, governance. We have heard this already. IBPM starts with great process ownership. It's not about having a process. I work with lots of organizations that have great processes, but the ownership is weak. And when the ownership, or there's multiple ownership, and when that's the case, if you don't have strong business or process ownership, even the best design processes will not be sustainable at high levels of performance. So having in the great enduring organizations that leverage IBPM for value creation, it starts with strong development of process ownership. Mihal just had a session for us that covered that very, very well. Now, the next level is the level that I call entrepreneurship. Once you establish that structure, that's very good, establishes a baseline on which you can improve and innovate. But now you need your professionals to be capable to identify what creates the most value, shortest time, simplest means, to create disproportional value for clients and disproportional values for the organization. So this is what I call the entrepreneurs and the real collaborative leaders in the organization. So great enduring organizations develop those individuals, and they are revealed by the test of execution. There's certainly some training that they go through, but ultimately it's about their ability to identify, prioritize, and deliver disproportional value through these projects and initiatives that they lead for the enterprise. So that's the next level, this entrepreneurs and collaborative leaders in the organization. The third level is more of that coaching level that you need for these initiatives. This is what I would call the serial entrepreneurs. This is not people who are just masters on methodology, by the way. These are masters in value creation. These are value creation leaders. They have been an entrepreneur already. They have become serial entrepreneurs in the organization, and they now have developed the collaborative leadership skills, innovation acceleration skills, and value creation skills to become a coach, for several of these new entrepreneurs who are emerging in the organization. The next level is the champion. The next level is the champion, who is someone who has hierarchical control and controls the resources in the areas in which you're trying to accelerate improvement and innovation on your IBPM system and structure. Now, notice that there is a difference here between the champion and the process owner. And this is something that we often see organizations confusing. Because a process owner needs to have deep understanding and knowledge of the process end to end. A champion may or may not have the knowledge, but he or she is in a position of authority and accountability for that area. So in some cases, you could potentially have an individual who is both a process owner and a champion, but often they're not the same people. It's very common for the process owner to be a bit more of a subject matter expert, and the champion to be the leader in that area, because the process owner could be the subject matter expert, but not have the authority to make certain changes on the process. Even though the process owner may own that process, he or she may not have the authority to make certain significant changes on the end-to-end process. So the project champion is the business champion, depending on what level you're looking at, has control over the resources in the area in which you're trying to make improvements and innovations. And it's important that you distinguish between these two roles, because they play different functions in this governance. And lastly is what we call the steering committee. And the steering committee is really a number of champions in the organization that have oversight in the IBPM, and most important, in the engine for value creation associated with that IBPM. So keep that in mind. This structure, it can be applied at a micro level. It could be done in a department, if you will, or it could be done at a macro level, enterprise-wide. How large or how small it is depends on how you're trying to implement IBPM and accelerate improvement and innovation in that part of the business or the overall business. But no matter at what level you apply, for sustainable value creation from IBPM, the structure needs to be there. It's a very important success factor. If it's not, and this, as mentioned in previous presentations, it doesn't mean that you hire new people for this. You're leveraging your current organization, and you are providing them with certain roles to play in that organization. If you go without making these roles and responsibilities clear, you will have a short life, or you have, in terms of your IBPM implementation, and most important, in terms of the results that you get from it. So the structure provides these building blocks to achieve disciplined IBPM value creation. Great. Now, what are the methods? What are the approaches that we use? Now, the methods can be varied, but what we see most often is a combination of methods and approaches to accelerate improvement and innovation once you have the IBPM structure in place. Now, you have innovation methods, which is all about thinking different, taking different perspectives at the problem, and coming up with novel solutions to the problem. It may or may not, each one of these methods may or may not include certain technology deployments. Of course, we have business process management itself, understanding the structure that I just showed in the previous slide, end-to-end process ownership and roles and responsibilities, and the hierarchy of processes in your organization. What are the key value chain processes that create the most value for your clients? And then we move on into methods that really improve and innovate the way you do work. And they may include Lean and Six Sigma, and without going deep into any of the subjects, they could include a number of other approaches. So separately, they are effective, combined, they're exceptional. But you have to remember, the methods alone do not transform businesses. People do. And although I show you these methods because these are proven approaches who have created billions of dollars for organizations all over the world, it's important to remember that when it becomes about the method, you have lost it. It has to be about value creation. And the method is just a disciplined approach and framework for executing on improvements and innovations, but not the answer itself. So I think most of you are great practitioners here, know this already. So let's see what IBPM value creation maturity looks like then. And I show you in this kind of summary on a staircase type of approach here. And basically it's what's built on and what's characterized by. So at the very initial level, when you look at these organizations, this IBPM is and innovation acceleration as a result of IBPM is really based on individual brilliance. There is there is a level that organizations just have brilliant people who see a presentation like this one and say, hey, we're going to go do this, and they're brilliant, they have passion, they have discipline, they have resilience, and they start implementing. And you know what? You're going to get some results. You're going to get some results by doing that. But those results are difficult to scale. So to really scale your BPM, you got to go beyond individual brilliance. So you need to start creating some systems. So you need to, those organizations that go to the next level, they have IBPM systems and mechanisms to translate the principles that we talk about into action. And that's built on sound governance, on clear structure and roles and responsibility to translate the principles into value creation and action. Now that also includes growth and technology accelerators, where we look at technology as a way of creating additional value. Because I think most of the people attending the session are experienced practitioners, and based on the questions that I've seen and the roster that I've looked at. So you know that most problems, 90% of the problems, you're going to solve them by focusing on the problem, not by saying that I have this technology and how can I use this technology. Now, 90% of problems problem solution should be driven by the problem itself. Now, there is a 10%, and this is something that we observe often in successful companies. There's a 10%, if you will, where it's the other way around, where I have a technology and I'm going to look around and see if it's going to create disproportional value somewhere. And it's okay to have that 10% window, I think, and do some experiments with that. But what's not okay is to just have the window become your 90%, that everything that you do is just driven by technology and we see how it works. Everybody in this call, I think, understands that that's not the best sound approach. Now, there is one level beyond this. Most organizations, even the ones that do good work and they have been around for a while, they get to this level, but then they stall. And they stall because to get to the next level is really difficult, because to get to the next level comes to culture. And culture eats strategy for breakfast. We know that. And all the things that we have done before is very sound, it's very mindful, it's very based on strategy and execution. That's great. But culture doesn't come only from the mind, it must come from the heart. And then for your organization to evolve, you need to create high levels of collaboration and innovation, and that requires development of collaborative leadership skills and innovation acceleration skills, which are not intuitive. It's not innovation is not an escape from disciplined thinking. It is an escape with disciplined thinking, but you got to teach people that discipline. They have to learn, and then most important, they have to practice that discipline to become really good at that. So the highest level of maturity, and there's only a few organizations around the world who are at that level. These are the trillion-dollar organizations. You know, they have developed to a level now where that's driven by a clear purpose, a culture with a strong set of core values that drives the organization, with great collaborative leadership and innovation acceleration skills development as a critical component of that culture. And it's a mechanism to translate the principles of innovation and value creation into action. And that is the ultimate level. All right, very good. Collaboration, innovation, and value creation are the ultimate measurements of IBPM effectiveness. Wonderful. Now let's get a little bit more practical. So what I want to do is to show you a case study, and I want to show you a case study in a very tough environment, in an organization that could care less about process. Process is like this process, and this process people are getting on the way of me getting the work done. So let's talk a little bit about that. I want to show you some real tough environment where people's like, I think process people are like a waste of time. They're just like bureaucrats, you know, with uniforms. They're not going to help me. So how do you penetrate someplace that like that? And a lot of your organizations may look at you like that. Oh, I'm a process expert. It's like, ooh, stay away from him. All right, so let's take a look at it. So this is the road to IBPM value creation in kind of a tough environment. So this was a project-driven organization, not a process-driven organization. We started by hiring some really expensive consultants and having these high-performance teams. We do believe in high-performance teams. So we had a consultant model, and this consultant starts telling us that, hey, we should like map your processes because they're very complex, and we should map them and improve them. Well, they mapped them, and over 2 years, they got zero improvement, zero benefit. They had a whole bunch of maps, and almost nothing got done. Oh, then they said, well, you know, what we need is to implement Lean Six Sigma. So let's implement Lean Six Sigma, and let's identify and prioritize what creates the most value. And that was better because they now started focusing on the parts of those processes that could be improved and innovated upon. And they had like 70% implementation level, which is great because you know, this is much greater discipline and traction by following the MAIC, the MEDV, and getting things done. Wonderful. But there was still a gap. And then they got to a point and the maturity level, they realized, they were coached on this, of course. But what we have here is that in a lot of our processes, we have processes, but our ownership is not clearly defined. So there was a big shift, and this was not an easy shift on just improving and innovating things to really understanding process ownership end to end. And that drove a whole new level of value creation with a 99% implementation rate over a decade and a quadruple of benefits in just the first couple of years that the shift took place. But this was incredibly hard because if you started in the organization trying to say, oh, let's start process ownership back in the year 2000 when they had the high performance teams, they would fire you and everybody who looked like you. And the reason for that is because they thought that process ownership back then was like solving world hunger. They were not ready for that. They needed to see value first before they could actually sign up for process ownership. A lot of organizations will have that. If you come up with your team, your leadership team, and say, oh, look, I went to this presentation, I have this beautiful process ownership architecture here, it's going to make our company save billions of dollars. You show that to your leadership team, they're unlikely to be excited about it unless they already have some background on it. So keep that in mind. You must start small in scale. And depending on your context and your culture, you must adapt to that context and culture before you bring up process ownership and you try to scale that. All right, so they did it. They decided to sit down and say, okay, we're gonna do this the right way. So what does the right way look like? The right way looks like the CEO and his or her direct reports sit down and decide, how do we create value end-to-end in this organization? And this is business model specific. There's not one size fits all. And it's what your leadership team agrees on in terms of the most critical value creation processes that you have in the organization. Ladies and gentlemen, this is shown here to you on an energy organization and infrastructure. This is a project-driven organization, not a process-driven organization. And it's a tough environment. But they identify on the green area what are those key core core client-facing processes that create value for the customer. And then they had to make some really tough decisions on what supporting processes, what executive leadership processes. And then by focusing on those key client-facing value creation processes, they were able to start making a significant shift. Now, at a high level, this is what you see. At the detail level, there are hundreds, if not of thousands, of sub-processes underneath those high-level end-to-end processes. So, very good. Why do they resist? Because they had projects, not processes. So the project teams receive and apply knowledge. How do you use process owners in an organization that's driven by projects? That's why I'm showing this example, because it's a tough one, because project is king, not process. So the way to make that work, and you have to think about how you're going to make your IBPM work for your organizational context, is creating a clear separation of roles and responsibilities on what the project teams do and what the process owners are expected to do. I'm not going to read these things. You can read them. The point here is that they have different roles and responsibilities. And IBPM becomes a communication interface in which you transform process excellence into execution excellence. Listen, if you work for a bank and all that you're doing is automating kind of like, repetitive processes that just require IT automation, that's easy. That's easy stuff. But when you're in an environment where people saying that, process improvement and innovation is really not that critical here because we're very unique, we have project-driven approaches. Or like some questions came up before that, oh, I have a low volume manufacturing, high customization type of thing going on. So you learn a lot on the edges of the distribution, on those real tough challenges. And this is a tough challenge. And that's why I'm sharing that with you. So with that, I want to wrap up. I want to go through quickly here. Innovation for simplification is what you want to keep in mind. And what I mean by that is that when you work with organizations that you all work with, they're incredibly complex. And they hire very smart people to solve complex problems. And what do those people do? They wrap up complex solutions around those complex problems. Why do they do that? Because they are capable intellectually of doing that. You do not want to do that in your organization. You have to remember that perfection is only attained when there's nothing left to take out. So this comes from Lean, but it also precedes Lean. This is just great design practices that from great designers have been with us for centuries. So IBPM designs, when you create them, keep innovation for simplification in mind. They must eliminate, then reduce, and then only automate. And I'm going to give you a very practical example to show you how this works. So how do we blend elimination, reduction, and automation, which is this innovation for simplification approach to get things done? So this is valve control stations. These are $1 billion power plants that have to design, procure, and construct more than 120 different types of unique and complex valve control stations. Now, this is one of probably 1,000 business processes they have to run for that $1 billion power plant. So how do they do that? How do they tackle a problem like that? Well, I'll tell you what happened before. Not to say anything bad about IT, but IT was leading a project for 18 months on trying to automate the design of those valve control stations. But it was a nightmare because they had multiple process owners. They had multiple designs. The people didn't agree on what they wanted. So there was 18 months into the automation and it still wasn't ready and it wasn't even close to ready. So if you change your mindset into eliminate, reduce, and automate, let's not automate that. Let's understand what it is first. And then we understood that there is high complexity on the design of a valve control station. There are levels of disagreements. There were 120 different designs per project on these valve stations. And I don't want you to understand this flow. What I want you to understand is that it requires real collaborative leadership to bring these people together and have them agree on what should be our approach to valve control station design. And that is a hard portion. That's the collaborative leadership portion that's so critical. Then when they look at it from the eyes of innovation for simplification, eliminate non-value-added activities or reduce them before you automate them, they identify that most of the steps are non-value-added steps. They just didn't know how to get rid of those steps. Now, they thought about different approaches they could have it. Could they have a single standard design that could do all the work? And the answer was no. They could have multiple designs that could do the work. And the work was not anymore, but those multiple designs was no longer 120. They were 6 designs. 6 designs per project that were used with 80% design. This was mentioned in the previous session. 80% design for those valve stations in 6 different designs could cover 100% of the case, and then we allow for 20% additional customization after that. But now the 6 core designs, after we eliminated, after we reduced, then we automated those, and those became 6 options on an IT system called Plant Vision that now I can drop off, get 80% of my design done, and then I can augment 20%, and I get it done 20 times faster. So notice that it was not by automating the process that I got to the solution. Is it by going back to its roots of process ownership, defining a single process owner, collaborating with the multiple process owners and a single process owner now, and coming up with not one standard approach, but in this case, 6 approaches that complete 120 different designs. Now, what matters most to wrap up? Ideas, methods, technologies, or people. Ideas are everywhere. What are uncommon are people willing to put their reputation behind ideas. Methods, they are important because they provide a disciplined approach to improvement and innovation, but methods do not transform businesses. People do. And technologies are awesome. We have process mining, RPA, AI. These are amazing technologies that we must leverage. But also remember that technology is a lot like a new romantic lover. We'll solve one need in the short run and may create 10 different problems in the long run if it is not the right technology. The right technology is the one that enables your processes to create the most value in the shortest time and simplest means. So be careful on how you choose it. And when it comes to people, yes, it's people, but it's not all the people. It's about finding the right people, the people who have the collaborative leadership skills and innovation acceleration skills to guide innovation through your organization. To show you the results behind this, after 1 decade of excellence and innovation in this organization, the first 6 years, we had a traditional approach of improvement and innovation without a solid foundation on IBPM. On year 7, amidst a crisis, very much not a pandemic crisis like what we have right now, but amidst a financial crisis, we shifted. We shifted to a model that was strongly founded on IBPM. And what we got from that were greater results, was based on strong IBPM, was based on the right people, finding the people in the organization that have the purpose, the passion, the discipline, the resilience to collaboratively lead and innovate. And that shift allowed for us to have exponential growth in value creation and in engagement, to the point where the organization grew to have over 5,000 professionals and collaborative leaders around the world, and be recognized for its excellence and infrastructure, be ranked the #1 private organization in the United States for leaders in leadership development, and win a major award on the Global Business Transformation and Operational Excellence Award Summit. So I want to just wrap up by thanking everybody for being here today through that journey. And remember, this journey is about you learning these concepts, understanding your culture, and reapplying these concepts in your culture to accelerate innovation, leadership development, and value creation. Because you want to be that individual who surfaces, who becomes that collaborative leader, who sets the standard for your organization. So thank you everybody for the time. And Brian, if you, I could not really look at the chat, the questions as I was going through the presentation. If you could help me with that, I would appreciate just relaying any questions that the audience may have passed to me.
My pleasure, Jose. Let me start by giving you, so Mike Bukowski has a couple of questions, so I'll put them in order. his first question is, what's an expected timeline for a company to bring all of its processes to defined in maturity levels?
Get the right background here for these answers. Very good. This is a great question. There is no timeline. Not only there is no timeline, most organizations will never get to that third level that I showed. If you recall this the stairway, the individual brilliance, the systemic approach, and then the collaborative leadership and innovation acceleration level, which is the greatest level, most organizations will never get to that. In one of the organizations I work with, we spent 12 years on a transformation. Now, listen, we didn't start on year one and says, oh, we're going to transform the business. This is what our cultural transformation looks like. I mean, you can have that aspirationally, but the reality is that it takes work, it takes value creation, it takes acceptance by the organization, it takes showing the new behaviors that the organization now will look and emulate, and those new behaviors will become the new culture. So there is no specific timeline. Or I think organizations really struggle to go from each one of the levels, from individual brilliance to the systemic level. That's a struggle. That's a big jump. Once they have the systemic level, which is, when we look at the good organizations today, most of them have figured that out. To be really good, you figure that out. But to be great is not something that's reserved for everybody, and you fill in the box and you check this check sheet here and you're gonna get there. That's really hard because it requires massive development of collaborative leadership and innovation acceleration skills, and that's a journey. You have to stop by understanding what those are and building those capabilities, and then you have to deliver value, because if it's not delivering value at scale, the organizations are not going to stick with it. So there's no timeline. There's work towards greatness. It's a bit of a moving target as well, because the world evolves, technologies evolve, systems evolve. Ultimately, you get there when you have a culture of excellence and innovation. When you have a culture of excellence and innovation, regardless of what business model you have, now you have an engine of continuous improvement and innovation. Collaborative leadership and innovation acceleration just happens. And to develop that, that's the ultimate competitive advantage for any organization. But it's very hard to achieve. No timeline.
Thank you, Jose. Mike, I hope that provided you with some further insight. Jose, if we may ask, how do you identify process owners from your perspective?
How do you identify what?
Process owners.
The process owners. So Michal talked about this on his session when he talked about the Jabil setup, and he provides some great answers there, and I'll add on to his perspectives. A lot of times it's obvious. It could be subject matter experts who have been very connected to the process for quite some time. They're well-respected influencers in the organization, and they're just obvious choices for process owners. But now let's talk about the difficulties, okay? The difficulties are sometimes you have potentially multiple process owners, because depending on how that process could be segmented in certain ways. The examples that I just showed to you are based on an organization that operates in 110 different countries. So there's all sorts of segmentations. And this was said before, and I'll reiterate, one great approach is to take the 80% design approach, right? Who is the majority owner, if you will, and that's a good candidate for process owner. Sometimes that individual can be identified by the organization, and we say, hey, can you own this process? And they'll look at you and say, I don't want to do that. That's too much work. And because they're subject matter experts, they have other jobs, they're supporting multiple projects, and now we tell them that there is responsibilities for ownership, real ownership. And some of them will not sign up for it, or will not, even when they're asked to do it, they'll not go for it. And this now depends a lot on organizational culture and the hierarchy and functions, so on and so forth. But some leaders will say that, hey, you have to do it. Other leaders will say, okay, you don't want to do it, that's fine, but understand that your role now is diminished because the process owner for this who have a greater role in the organization. So there are a lot of conversations in there. Those are tough, critical conversations to be had. So most often there are subject matter experts, there are or real owners that have established their ownership just by their actions. And in a lot of cases, you have to assign them.
Thank you, Jose. One final question and then a comment. So where does the use of a process classification framework, i.e. APQCs, fit into your BPM strategy?
I'm not sure if the person who asked this question is specifically thinking about the maturity levels that you have in IT, for example, and they are and we talked a little bit of a proxy to those that I see most often being used in the context of true enterprise-wide business process management. That was a slide that had, from recognized to define all the way to optimize levels. So those are concepts that have evolved with practice in enterprises, and the names, they matter. The names have meaning, but the maturity levels, you see a lot of similarities between those maturity levels and what you see, for example, on IT maturity levels.
Thank you, Jose. And finally, a comment from Christina, who's obviously enjoyed what you're presenting. And I'll read this verbatim. I love how you are putting this all together. I am actually working on a speech for collaborative leadership. Although I don't use that term, I'm sitting here saying yes, yes.
Christina, that's awesome. The IBPM, as we have covered today, is an interconnected system with lots of complexity. And then the great ones, they have the ability to understand how the systemic approach works. And we started today with Tom talking about the systems approach, and we had two great presentations about the use of technology and real life applications on those approaches. And I try to wrap up today with this big view. There's so much to this. I mean, these are master classes that take 2 weeks long, and we're summarizing in 30 minutes. But I hope that you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together and understanding that the ultimate goal is to have your IBPM as a platform for real acceleration of innovation and value creation for your organization. And collaborative leadership skills are critical to get to the ultimate level. So I'm gonna change hats here, Brian, because I'm responsible for keeping this on time still, and I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna wrap up this session and day. I hope you had an enjoyable time and you learned good things. Tomorrow we have an incredible lineup that includes Nokia and Siemens presenting more on IBPM, more on collaborative leadership, more on what it really takes, not only to create intelligent business process management, but to scale it for value creation. So ladies and gentlemen, this is a pleasure. Please fill out the survey. Make sure you go on LinkedIn and follow the discussions. We have our CEO, VJ, has an open dialogue on LinkedIn. I have another open dialogue that started a little while ago on LinkedIn as well. So connect with us, and we look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.